Hi, Lou here to talk about something you should consider in your designs, which is how long does it take to set up my tabletop game? So why is this important? Well, first of all, we're in the age of instant gratification. People want to play now. They don't want to have to wait while they set things up. This is a great advantage of video games, of course. Usually you fire it up and you're ready to go. Also, another characteristic of modern day is that games tend to be shorter and shorter. If that's true, we don't want the setup to become a large fraction of the total time to play the game. We want a quick setup. Now, card games have a big advantage over board games because there's no maneuver or geospatial relationships in card games. So most card games, you deal out some cards. There might be separate decks you deal from or something like that, but still it's quite quick. War games, which usually have maneuver and geospatial relationships, because it's hard to depict a war without that, are different. Location is important, and the setup usually takes longer. We can also differentiate between the kind of setup. There are static setups that put everything in the same place every time, which is typical. And there are setups where the players are implementing strategies, as in Risk, Stratego, or even as in making up a deck in Magic, where the setup is done off stage, more or less, or most of the setup. So it's the difference between static setups and player variable setups. I don't think the time required for players to implement strategy should be counted as setup time because they're already playing the game. But not everybody feels this way. I know people who don't like player variable setups. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. So in your game, it can pay to provide both variable and static setups. Neither is necessarily better. After all, they just serve different purposes. Now, I'll give you an example of 3 different setups that I've done recently. In my game Mandate of Heaven, which is about the fall of Chinese dynasties, a hidden identity block game, I test always with a player variable setup because that's the most strategic and because that's the planner style and I'm a planner. But there are 2 more setups. Both specify where your pieces will start but not which ones. In one case, each player chooses which pieces to place in those locations. So if it says there are 2 units in this hex, the player gets to choose which 2 units. In the third setup, the improviser version, players place their pieces face down, having mixed them up, so they don't know which piece is which when they're placing them, and then they stand them up to play. In any case, I like to keep the setup simple, just like I like to keep everything else simple. I'm amazed that people play these fiddly games with stuff littered all over the table, even at the start. Lots of cards and bits. It takes quite a while to set it up. How often is this necessary? Do you want a static setup that takes 10 minutes? I don't, but some people don't seem to mind. The simpler the setup, the sooner players will actually be playing the game. Now, if you think about the setup in your game from the early conception, you're more likely to end up with a short rather than a long setup, and there's no drawback to a short setup. So time to actual play, which includes variable player setups, is important. Don't discourage players with a long, fiddly, static setup. Thanks for listening.